Rockinitis.
I wanna go to heaven, but I've been told the Rockinitis has got my soul. Been rocking and rolling till the break of dawn. Man, I wonder if my baby is still at home. Wonder if my baby is still at home.
This, a lot of people call this rock and roll swings. This is done with the, let's see, with the left hand, yeah. And the right hand fits in with something like this here. Here we go now. Oh, if that isn't enchanting, nothing is. Go ahead, kids. Dance. Go crazy.
Hi, cats and kittens. My name is Michael Willmore, and the program is Rockinitis. We're going to be doing a show on a real old-time artist that has a lot to do with rock and roll, even though he may not sound it, a guy called Johnny Ray. Now, when my father died, and I started really getting into Johnny Ray, I went through my father's stuff, and he only had one album in his entire collection, my father, and this is the album. It's Johnny Ray, his very first album, with the Canadian cover.
Wow.
Now, the Canadian cover is really, really rare.
Well, I mean, I've never even seen that before.
Yeah. Now, the original American album cover was this album cover here. Can you help support that? That's the American album cover there. But to put an album out, in those days, there were hardly any albums, for one thing, in 1952.
Yeah, everybody bought singles.
Yeah. So albums were quite hard to come by. So when they went to put it out, an album cover had to be printed in Canada before it could be issued. They couldn't put it out with an American cover. It had to be printed in Canada to be released in Canada. So they didn't have time to print it all out because the public demand was so huge, they had to get it out instantly.
Right.
So the Canadians put out this cover, which is a unique cover, to Canada only, so that they could get it on the market within the week.
Oh, yeah.
And then they eventually withdrew this and put it out with this cover. Anyway, this was the only album in my father's collection.
Wow. That's amazing.
And it was, anyway, so I started getting into Johnny Ray at that point.
I'm just a shadow of myself. Why, there's no feeling quite the same. I don't even know my name. I've lost in love, and I've lost my peace of mind. You went away and turned a bright world blind. I'm even talking to myself, and my heart and I agree. Oh, what a quarrel last night. Well, I guess it's too late for regrets, but here am I thinking it over with my first cup of coffee and my first 2 cigarettes. Oh, all of me, why not take all of me? Can't you see I'm no good without you? Take my lips, I want to lose them. Take my arms, my legs, baby, you know I want to lose them. Your goodbyes brought teardrops from my eyes. Realize I ain't no good without you.
Johnny Ray was once the world's biggest singing star. In 1952 and 1953, he was the most popular singer in the world. His controversial style virtually opened the door for rock and roll and influenced an entire upcoming generation of singers. He was an Oregon farm boy who lost most of his hearing at the age of 12. His obsession with music led him into the world of burlesque, sleazy nightclubs, the after-hours film noir-like netherworld of various downtowns after dark, the black and tan night spots or strip clubs of Gotham cities of a bygone age. He got around in those days. One of his best friends was the burlesque queen Tempest Storm, and he was arrested on homosexual morals charges in 1951, although it didn't come to light until 1954, and he was arrested twice more on similar charges in 1959, dealing more crippling blows to his career. But he continued to tour internationally until his death from alcoholism and liver failure in 1990. He was a tortured artist, and it shows in his performance. I'm paraphrasing this, but listen to this first-hand account of an important personal appearance that he made at the Copacabana nightclub. This is from the book by Johnny Whiteside. Over 600 people were waiting there in the club. The house lights dimmed. Frank Sinatra was in the audience, so the anticipation was high. When the MC called his name, Johnny loped out to the piano and launched into a straight reading of Walkin' My Baby Back Home. He played piano standing up. Then he sang his own composition, The Little White Cloud That Cried. Johnny suddenly turned on, shifting instantaneously from bashful boy singer to a man scouring the deepest truth from the lyrics. The audience was, as he counted on, completely unprepared. His performance, coming after such a mild opener, shocked the house. He flexed, vibrated, shivered. Every broad, frantic gesture and dramatic pose emphasized the lyrics with a physical spontaneity that was electrifying. His voice exhilarated them. When he was finished, the crowd was torn from its show-me attitude into wild enthusiasm. He sat down to sing Don't Blame Me. Then he rose from the piano during the next song and dashed himself onto the floor, microphone in hand. They gasped. The rest of the show spun by, like the hectic view from a carousel, with Johnny here, now there, now out in amongst the audience. Now back on stage at the piano, leaping off the drum riser, suddenly dropping to his knees, when he sang Out in the cold again, he slowly wrapped himself in the stage curtain with just part of his face exposed. Then on With These Hands, solemn and alone, with a single pinpoint spotlight, the sole illumination, in otherwise total darkness, a trance set in. The audience was mesmerized. On the closing line of the song, the spotlight shrank down to just his hands, extending outward in a dramatic grasping gesture until just the hands alone were visible. As his voice trailed off to silence, the spotlight snapped off to total darkness. Then there was silence. Then wild shouts and screams from the audience pierced the darkness. It was no longer a song session, Billboard magazine noted. It was a masterful display of showmanship and staging that evoked mass hysteria, resembling a holy roller meeting. Ray gave all he had. He cried, he tore at his hair, he twitched and convulsed, and he bared his soul. When he did the last song, Cry, there was sheer pandemonium. And when he finished, he was beat to a pulp, dripping perspiration. He was exhausted. So was the audience. This man was a phenomenon. At the time, he was working within the big band pop music bandstand tradition, yet his radical style and frightening sincerity threatened to destroy the bandstand tradition. Johnny Ray was a vehicle of liberation. He laid the groundwork for rock and roll. Frank Sinatra had been his predecessor, and Elvis Presley was his successor 5 years later. Johnny Ray was the missing link, the bridge between Sinatra and Elvis. And during his early career, he was my dad's favorite singer.
Please don't talk about me when I'm gone. Oh, you know you're gonna miss your loving daddy from now on. And just remember, if you can't say things that sound real nice, well, you better say nothing at all. That's your daddy's advice. Oh, now listen to me. You go your way, I gotta go mine. It's sad, but it's true. But I here's a little kiss, and I hope that this brings an awful lot of luck to you. Well, it makes no difference how I carry on.
In the rock and roll era, he did manage to have some hits. And the biggest hit he had was called Just Walkin' in the Rain. Fabulous, fabulous performance. And it was originally done by a group that was confined to the Mississippi State Penitentiary, a five-man black doo-wop gospel vocal group, and all of the members of the group were members of the Tennessee State Penitentiary at Nashville, and they were noticed by the warden, who got them to perform at various civic functions, usually at the governor's mansion.
Right.
And part of the prison rehabilitation program, they were taken to record to Memphis under armed guard. So the Prisonaires had the original version of Just Walkin' in the Rain, and that's contained on this great album here, which is called 5 Beats Behind Bars, a tune which was covered in short order by Johnny Ray. Now the lead singer in the group had just an absolutely marvelous voice, and the only thing is, though, each of these guys was in for like serious crimes.
Right.
And the lead singer was Johnny Bragg, and he was in for 6 counts of rape.
Oh,
So he had the heart of the devil, but the sound of an angel.
yeah.
His voice was just spectacular. And we'll hear the original version of Just Walkin' in the Rain, and I think you'll just fall in love with this guy's voice. The Prisonaires with Just Walkin' in the Rain.
Just walking in the rain, getting soaking wet, torture in my heart by trying to forget. Just walking in the rain, so long and blue, all because my heart it still remember you.
Just walking in the rain, getting soaking wet, torture in my heart by trying to forget. Just walking in the rain, so alone and blue, all because my heart still remembers you.
Anyway, I love that that version there, Just Walking in the Rain. I think I actually prefer it to the Prisoner's original.
Yeah, no, I think he does a better job.
He belts it out,
Yeah.
and he gives the song a more, you can kind of relate to it even more.
Yeah.
And you realize what a truly great song it really is when Johnny Ray does it. But the Johnny Bragg version, boy, that version gets me too.
Oh, yeah.
It's fabulous. Anyway, the Prisonaires, there's a CD and a book out about the Prisonaires. The Prisonaires the book was written by Jay Warner, and you know, they got a really interesting history. They had 4 45s released on the Sun record label, and Johnny Bragg, he was from Nashville, Tennessee. He was the singer of the Prisonaires, lead singer, and he was illiterate, and he was incarcerated since 1943.
Really?
So he was
10 years.
Yeah, he was in
So he
jail.
wrote in 53.
Yeah, he already been in jail for 10 years.
Wow.
And he was in like a lifer, you know, basically. And he had 6 charges of rape at the age of 17, so he ended up being in jail. They basically put him back so far in the jail that he couldn't see daylight for years. And the other guys in the Prisonaires, 2 were in for murder. One was in for involuntary manslaughter, and the other one was in for grand larceny. So they were a bunch of bad boys.
Oh, man, that's for sure.
Wow. Anyway, finally, after serving 16 years in prison, Johnny Bragg's sentence was commuted in 1959. And when he got out of jail, he had met some woman through correspondence or this and that and the other. I don't know what the story was all. But anyway, when he met, he rendezvoused with her, like within a day or two.
Yeah.
And they went and got into her car or his car, I don't know. And they started making out on a public street. And anyway, the cop caught them. And he ended up being put back in jail for parole violation on another sex charge.
Oh, my God.
Anyway, finally, the guy died of cancer in 2004. He was 79 years old. And he had trouble with sex all his life.
Did he get out of jail, like, eventually?
Eventually, yeah.
Okay.
But, you know, he's had trouble with sex all his life, same as me. And my trouble is I'm not getting any. That's my trouble with sex. In 1956, Just Walkin' in the Rain made number 2. Elvis with Love Me Tender was number 1. Jim Lowe was number 3 with The Green Door. The Johnny Ray version sold a couple of million actually at the time, and was on the national charts for 28 weeks. And the direct follow-up single was You Don't Owe Me a Thing, which went to number 10 and stayed on the pop charts for 12 weeks at the tail end of 1956. Marty Robbins, the country and western singer, wrote and recorded the original version a few months earlier, and his version was really no match for the strange voice of Johnny Ray. Johnny's cover version on it, he belts it out and sings the lyrics like he's lived them. And they even brought back that same session man they used on Walkin' in the Rain, Jerry Duane, the Whistler.
Just because I'm your used to be. Forget me. You don't owe me a thing. My heart is crying now, but it will laugh again somehow. Forget me. You don't owe me a thing.
Just because I'm your used to be. Forget me. You don't owe me a thing. My heart is crying now, but it will laugh again somehow.
Johnny Ray had an album out actually that was kind of about sex and about his.
Well, so you could be like Johnny Ray. he went for women and men.
Yes,
yeah, double your chances.
That's true. He was like bisexual before anybody even knew what the term meant.
That's right.
Anyway, when he was over in England, he's always been huge in England, and as you know, in England, gay men are not uncommon.
That's right.
In England. So anyway, he went, and nobody cared over there. I mean, so he was huge over there.
Yeah.
And he had this incredible album called A Sinner Am I, which could be kind of a homosexual confession if you want to look at it like that, like he wrote it. And it's with Jack Parnell and his orchestra, an English orchestra. And just check out this cover.
It's unbelievable.
This cover is absolutely unbelievable. Only the English could come up with a cover like that.
Just fabulous.
It is. It's. The English invented kinky sex, right? And that album cover.
I've never been to England, Michael.
That album cover is the kinkiest cover I ever saw.
It's pretty cool.
Anyway, I think this is the tune that we'll go out with. Can you support that before it droops? Yep. Anyway, and we'll go out with one of his greatest.
Your 12 inches drooping, Michael.
We'll go out with one of his greatest tunes, A Sinner Am I, written by Johnny Ray. 1959, only released in England from the great album, A Sinner Am I. Johnny Ray with the Jack Parnell Orchestra.
A sinner am I for falling in love with you. A sinner am I for thinking you'd make this dream come true. A love like this was never meant for man's imagination. And so I tell myself that I'm involved with mere infatuation.
Anyway, I know it's not actually technically rock and roll, but his style was rock and roll. his approach.
And his lifestyle.
His lifestyle, his approach, the way they called him Mr. Emotion.
Yeah.
Because he put everything he had into it. And like he threw himself around the stage, he flounced around, he was totally demonstrative when he sang. And when he started in '51, that had never been seen before in public. And he was my father's favorite singer. And that brings me closer to him just for that.
It was a nice tribute
Yeah.
to both.
Yes. And actually, you have a rock and roll family of sorts as well.
Yeah, it's getting that way, yeah.
Now, what's happening with that? I heard.
Well, my son plays drums in several bands, but one of his bands is called The Manipulators, actually. It's this here.
Okay.
And it's funny how it worked out. My son and I went to a concert for a band from Italy called The Rippers, which is this band here. Just a fabulous group, 60s garage sort of sounding band. And so we went to see them, and this band called The Manipulators were opening. And I said to my son, I said, no, that's a band you need to be in, a band like that. These guys are just so good live. Well, their stage presence is just unbelievable. And the weirdest thing, a month later, they phoned him up, not even knowing us.
Not connected.
Not connected at all. Just someone had recommended my son.
Yeah.
They'd seen him drumming in another band, and they thought he was a good drummer. So he became part of the Manipulators, and they've just put a CD out.
Oh, cool.
Which I think is just a fabulous CD, and I'm very proud of it and proud of them.
Good.
They're a great band.
You've raised them well.
My other son's becoming a drummer as well, so
Okay.
it's our household
It's
is
gonna be
very
a noisy
noisy.
house.
Very noisy. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of thumping coming out of the
Oh
basement.
yeah, for sure.
Anyway, Johnny Ray, just to wind up here, he was important historically and important hysterically.
Yes.
Because there was a Johnny Ray mania.
Absolutely.
I mean, because there was, like, you could say that there was somewhat of a bit of a mania for...
Well, in England, it was such a huge, like the streets just filled up with people.
Yeah.
And it was going to become a riot. They had to drag him out and get him to climb up the fire escape and go to the top of a building just so people could see him, so they wouldn't cause a riot.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how worked up everybody was over.
Well, he said, I realized pretty early on, once I started to really make it, that I was totally capable of inciting a riot.
Oh,
I
absolutely.
mean, he could work the crowd up to the point where they would lose control of themselves.
Yeah.
He mesmerized them. He was a fabulous entertainer, and a very important bridge between Frank Sinatra
And Elvis.
and Elvis. He was a transitional artist that led into rock and roll, and he's important for that reason.
Yeah.
Only certain artists have inspired that mania,
That's right.
and Johnny Ray was one of them.
Yeah.
And he died of liver failure in 1990, age 63.
Drank like a fish.
Drank like a fish, total alcoholic, but a social alcoholic.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, and some of the antics that he got up to are documented really well in that Johnny Ray book that I showed.
Well, he had an affair with this married woman for years. They were best friends as well.
I can remember my stepfather talking about that at Christmas one time. The relatives that we only saw once a year were going out the door, and they said, well, what's with Johnny Ray? You're doing all that necking in public in the Copacabana. He'd be with that columnist necking up a storm. And I remember my stepfather going, he's just trying to prove he can go the other way, too.